Ultimately, it seems like Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines 2 is shaping up to be a massive disappointment. At this rate, you're gonna have to get a vampire to suck me off to get me to play that one, am I right? In other news, the Switch 2 has finally been announced for the low price of, what was that? $450? No, sorry, I'm mistaken. The pack-in version with Mario Kart Tour is actually $500. Oh, and Mario Kart Tour on its own is being sold for grand smackin' 80. Between tariffs and eggs, I am making prayers for the wallets of Nintendo fans everywhere. This is Peter with Spike National News Network, signing off.
So yeah, the Nintendo Switch 2 is happening. I know that the main coverage is a little late considering how fast the gaming zeitgeist seems to move on from things, but a few things have been bugging me since the sort of big reveal of the Nintendo Switch 2 that is still being talked about today that I really thought I should cover. While I do agree that Nintendo's overall coverage of the Switch 2 has been kind of scummy, at the same time I'm seeing tons of videos such as why everybody should boycott the Switch 2, and I get a little fed up because in many ways, as I'll point out in a bit, this is kind of all of our fault. But at the very least, I think that everybody can agree that we need to sort of start to understand our anger instead of throwing out all of these empty threats to a multinational billion-dollar company. But at the same time, it makes sense why people are kind of even irrationally upset. The $80 price tag for games like Mario Kart World are completely unjustified. Just the morning that I'm recording this, they had that big Mario Kart World Direct, and everybody in chat was spamming drop the prices. And reasonably so, the $80 price tag is absolutely absurd. But anyways, I want to go into a little bit of a deeper analysis about why everybody is so upset about the Nintendo Switch 2. Because if you get like a group of people, they're all probably going to tell you wildly different things. So the main facets of this video is we're going to start off talking about the console price, then we're going to talk about the game prices, and then we're going to talk about the sort of digital game cart situation. And in between that, we're going to be covering a few juicy things like how I think some Switch criticism is honestly unjustified. I know that's the weirdest one, so let's start with that. Boycott the Switch 2. Do not buy the Nintendo Switch 2. The Switch 2 is the final straw. One surface level reason why I'm kind of upset with these videos in the last few weeks, even though this video is kind of reminiscent of that, is because it's sort of saying Nintendo was always bad, but here is the line that we're drawing that they finally crossed. But more importantly, these videos do something shitty, very, very shitty. They trash on Nintendo just blatantly for reasons that aren't deserved, because they're made in this sort of commentary leafy style where once you get that one or two criticisms are valid, you can start to just go off on Nintendo, and it's valid because, hey, Nintendo's bad, I can just start shitting on them. I guess to the point where these people sound less like Nintendo fans and more like self-indulgent 15-year-olds who love their Xbox 360 and, oh, the Wii U is garbage. I mean, listen to some of these clips.
Years ago when Nintendo games came out, whether they were good or bad, you could see that 99% of them were always made by people who genuinely cared and were encouraged to do so.
Nintendo is charging real money for a tech demo on how to use the Switch 2.
But what about those triggers? Somehow we've gone yet another generation of Nintendo consoles without analog triggers. Another generation where the triggers are just buttons.
Is how expensive Mario Kart World is going to be. So I'm not going to be surprised when people boycott this game. And like I said, the only way that I get it is if I get it in the bundle for $500 because it's priced as a $50 game.
Nintendo seems to love this disgustingly soulless art style that clearly requires very minimal processing power to render without much issue.
Mario?
First of all, shitting on the art style of Mario Kart World and Donkey Kong Bonanza? What are you talking about? It's sort of like the one unified thing Nintendo fans can at least agree on is that these games do look pretty good. But again, the main reason why I'm making this video is because you'll watch something that's anti-Nintendo about boycotting Nintendo, but it just delves into this art style is cringe, go buy an Xbox 360. And this is coming from somebody that thinks it's fair to give Nintendo criticism when they really deserve it. For instance, the Mario Kart 8 booster pack, those tracks had some really terrible textures. Everybody was upset about those, and rightfully so. Those looked like shit. And so yeah, we'll give Nintendo flack for that, but Mario Kart World and Donkey Kong Bonanza, we're just throwing out insults for the sake of doing. Let's rein things back and actually talk about why we should be upset at Nintendo. And one other thing that this guy just randomly throws out is the lack of analog triggers for the Switch 2. What is this statement? There's a reason why Nintendo hasn't had analog triggers since, the GameCube? Because they realized that for their style of consoles, for the Wii, for the Wii U, for the Nintendo Switch, they don't need analog triggers for the types of games they're making. It doesn't match the style of Nintendo games. In fact, I would go so far to say that there's no games even on the original Switch that I wish they had analog triggers for. Mario Kart Odyssey, Luigi's Mansion 3, all of these games work really well without analog triggers. The only time in which this argument makes sense is when they re-released games like Super Mario Sunshine. Then, of course, yeah, that game relied heavily on analog triggers, but it's from another generation. You can't expect every old piece of software to work with Nintendo's new hardware. For instance, in the exact same 3D Mario collection, they had to make ways for the Wiimote to work even though you're using a Nintendo Switch. And again, it's not one-to-one. This is just what we have to deal with as consumers of products that change rapidly over the years. It's such a nothing argument, and it's why, again, I'm hoping to rein into why we should actually be criticizing the Nintendo Switch 2. Okay, so now that that's out of the way, let's start with some fair critiques, starting with prices. Okay, so one of my friends said something that I definitely agree with. It's that the Nintendo Switch 2 and its components aren't terribly overpriced individually. It's just that altogether, the package of the console and the games is enough to really make people not want it anymore. Also, I just want to say that Mario Kart World for $80, that's one that I definitely think crosses the line a little. But before I talk about what Nintendo is calling variable pricing, let's talk about the console itself. Because console pricing exists in a really weird category I think people don't realize. When the PS3 was revealed, it was shown off at $500. Then the Xbox 360 was revealed, and it was like, I think $200 less. This was a big enough thing to really get Xbox in the door of a lot of consumers who wouldn't have otherwise bought one. The pricing of just $200 more than what people wanted was really important for Xbox. And something recent that you may not know is that the Xbox Series X, for every single console that Microsoft ships, they're losing $100 of profit. They are actually selling these consoles at a deficit. And I wouldn't be surprised if something similar is happening for the PS5. But even adjusted for inflation, I'm pretty sure the Nintendo Switch 2 is now Nintendo's most expensive console to date. And this is really important, even if it's just something in the back of consumers' minds. And this is what really matters, because I have friends, some of my closest friends, who grew up with Nintendo. I didn't even grow up with Nintendo. I got into them like late in middle school. Some of my friends have been playing Nintendo titles since elementary school. Yet these exact consumers, the people that should be number one in Nintendo's ecosystem and mindset, the number one person they should be shipping consoles to as the Nintendo Switch 2 starts to roll out, these friends of mine don't want to buy a Nintendo Switch 2. Some of Nintendo's number one consumers are being gated out because Nintendo was never a cheap console, but they were always sort of a step below. And more importantly, it doesn't feel like the Nintendo Switch 2 is a worthwhile upgrade to actually buy. For instance, I have a little theory about the Nintendo Switch home screen. It has notably not been shown off like at all at any event or anything, and I'm almost certain because it looks a lot like the original Switch's home screen. And so I think when people see that the Switch 2's home screen is basically like the original Switch's but a little different, I think Nintendo is scared that consumers are going to instantly be like, yeah, I don't need this sort of direct upgrade as much. This is something that we can correlate to happening with the Wii U, but I'm going to talk about that a bit later and you'll see why. But okay, so this would all be maybe a little better if Nintendo didn't throw out their shitty understanding of variable pricing. As mentioned earlier, Mario Kart World is going to be sold for $80 retail, technically $50 in the bundle, but they're saying that it's worth $80. And that is, in my opinion, fucking insane. The thing is, this price increase is something that I've been really theorizing about for years and years, and it's something that I have a lot of passion for. You see, about 3 years ago in an article on my website, I talked about how this new form of pricing is both really great and a little scary for the future of the industry. First of all, games now for a few generations have always been $60. AA games, AAA games, everything has been sold for the price of $60. It can be, a sort of menial first-person shooter. It can be a massive AAA giant like Red Dead Redemption 2. It doesn't matter, they're all being priced at $60. This means that many of these games, from the most, menial platformer to the highest of cinematic experiences, are all being sold for the same exact price, which means they all suspectedly have $60 worth of value. The publishers are directly saying, this has $60 worth of value we're giving you. This can be the time it takes to beat, the quality of the visuals, the quality of the gameplay, the systems. The quality of the entire experience equates to $60. It makes no sense, but it's kind of what we've all gotten used to playing video games. You see, this is why I think the idea of a $70, even $80 game is actually kind of interesting. It's intriguing for somebody, because I think we can all agree that all these games aren't necessarily worth $60. So then, once all these menial experiences start to maybe be sold for $70, I think they're going to start to either undersell, or we'll just start to see them getting decreased in price. So at this point, I think we have two paths. We have staying at this blanket $60, $70 price range in which every game stays here, or we can do what I have kind of coined as smart pricing. And we can see what I'm going to describe as smart pricing as taking place over the entire gaming industry, as it's been a long time since the standard experience for buying a game has been walking into your local GameStop, buying the yearly COD for $60. You see, things have already changed. Live service games, for instance, are being released for free, but you're not paying that $60 price tag, meaning that $60 price tag is usually eliminated, but you're encouraged to buy things in-game. But at the same time, this is where some weird meshes start to happen. For instance, Ubisoft will release a brand new $60 Assassin's Creed game, but they want that increased revenue stream of microtransactions, so boom, XP boosters. And guess what happens? The gameplay itself of these games are starting to sort of deteriorate, because even though it's a single-player experience, it's being built around systems that are meant to invigorate the player to actually buy microtransactions. It's literally getting encouraged to buy microtransaction add-ons in single-player games. It's fucking insane. But hear me out. These companies want more money, and for a valid reason. Releasing a $60 game without microtransactions, it doesn't look appealing to them anymore. In fact, releasing a $60 game without microtransactions is even less appealing than releasing a free game with microtransactions. And this is actually impacting us in ways that you don't see. For instance, something that I'm pretty sure a lot of you don't realize is that we haven't really gotten a AAA Naughty Dog game this entire generation. For the entire PS5, we haven't gotten a brand new Naughty Dog game. We do have the game Intergalactic planned for the future, but still, we're more than halfway through the PS5's life cycle, and we haven't gotten a new Naughty Dog game. And part of the reason is because Naughty Dog was actually one of the companies that Sony had planned to build a brand new live service game. And then comes 2024, Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League, Concord. These live service games fucking flop. And I'm pretty sure that's part of the reason why we see Intergalactic being pushed so heavily now. Because, well, those things failed. Let's get Naughty Dog back on that AAA grind set. The $60 price tag simply isn't appetizing to these companies anymore. And by the way, I'm not trying to say that the $70, $80 price tag will eliminate microtransactions. The amount that these games with microtransactions make is absolutely absurd. There's nothing that can quell that thirst from the companies. But at the same time, paying a $70, $80, $90 price tag when these games really deserve it will actually encourage companies at least a little more to start making games without them. And at the same time, my idea of smart pricing has some middle grounds. Of course, indie games for a long time have released between $5 and $30, and a few rare games like Helldivers 2 have released at $40. Helldivers 2 is one of my favorite examples because it is somewhat of a live service game, but at the same time, the microtransactions of that game aren't too egregious. Not only is it almost entirely cosmetic, but also the cosmetics themselves, I think they're the cheapest out of like any live service game. They're only a few dollars compared to Fortnite's $20 skins. And for that reason, I think it's really cool that Helldivers 2 was released at $40. It's sort of that perfect price where I'm really happy to buy this game. But this whole thing about smart pricing is that Nintendo has their own idea of smart pricing. It's called variable pricing. I wonder what that means. It's the exact same fucking thing, except it's done with that traditional Nintendo lack of empathy or charm. You see, the biggest thing about Switch 2 game pricing for me is that Nintendo is essentially saying that they want to have this interesting idea of smart pricing, where games are priced at that level that you really expect them to be. But at the same time, they don't at all. Okay, so back in 2022, Nintendo released Tears of the Kingdom for $70, their first big $70 game. Nice, that's a good price. I'm actually kind of happy, especially because later that exact same year, they released Mario Wonder for $60. Tears of the Kingdom 70, Mario Wonder 60. Nintendo, they're doing what I want. They're doing smart pricing. I agree with these price tags. But then they fucked it up. You see, Nintendo wants to make you think they're doing variable pricing. They make you want to think they're doing smart things with how they're pricing their games. But they aren't. But the thing is, if Nintendo actually wanted this, they would have some games releasing at $60, at $50, at $40. Actual variable pricing wouldn't just mean you have games releasing at $70 and $80. It means the whole plethora of games are going to be released at different prices, all the way down to below $60. Variable pricing is a lure because they make you think that they're going to be releasing $40 games at $40, $60 games at $60, and so on. But they aren't doing that at all. Variable pricing is fake, it's a facade, and I don't believe in Nintendo anymore. And this is gonna be a sort of weird metaphor, but Disney fans will know that back in the day, Disney had a sort of ticket pricing for their different attractions, where the bigger thrill rides would have more expensive tickets than the smaller rides. Of course, going on Space Mountain isn't gonna cost as much as going on Small World. But an interesting thing about that is back in the day, the entry price to get in was relatively low. You see, what Disney knew is that people would pay to go on all these rides. And so to get them in the door so they can make all this money on rides, they would make the entry cost a little less expensive. This is what Xbox was doing by losing $100 on every Xbox Series X sold. And a little thing to think about is, what other things would Disney be making money on? Oh, I guess they'd, overprice food a little by a few dollars. Just like how all of these companies, including Nintendo, have yearly subscriptions you need to buy. You see, Nintendo isn't raising prices in one place so they can cut corners on another. No, every single part of their pricing plan individually is going up. But breaking away from pricing, let's talk about the digital game cartridge situation. And I have a point about this that I haven't seen many people making. You see, Nintendo is releasing new game cartridges in which the actual game data won't be held on the cards themselves. The cartridge is basically going to be a key to allow you to download a game digitally. Now, some people have made some wild theories like, oh, you're only going to be able to use one of these cartridges for each Nintendo console. This makes no sense. You're going to be able to hand these cards to other people willy-nilly and have other systems download them. I mean, it's pretty obvious that's the way that they want these to be set up. But the one interesting point is that Nintendo has always been very anti-emulation, to the point where I would make the bet that Nintendo has spent more money in litigation against people hacking their systems in recent years than spent on developing a new Mario game. But the funniest thing is this means that you will never really own that game data on the cartridge itself. Like, morally speaking, if you're handing people physical media, but you're not letting them actually own that media, I personally think that you're giving people a reason to want to emulate it. It's like exactly what happened with the death of the 3DS eShop. Once that happened, I think that people were a lot more morally okay downloading the HShop and downloading games illegally. Because the only way to legally get these games sometimes is to pay for them very overpriced online. It's to almost have to buy a system that has these games pre-installed, because some of them are only available digitally. So Nintendo almost seems keen to make us want to emulate and hack their device at this point. It's really weird. And more importantly, this is sort of getting closer to a weird dystopian future. I mean, imagine getting a disc for The Hangover 2 to play on Blu-ray, and then when you click to play it, it opens up Netflix to have you stream it instead. Like, what the fuck is this? Finally, I just want to cap this off with the thought that this is kind of all of our collective faults in a small way, not massively. It's obviously the multinational billion-dollar company's fault, but a little part of this is because of our consumer practices. You see, there's a concept called Unjustified that I was recently learning about, and it's basically the steps it takes for a company or corporation to slowly disintegrate. The process goes first, you need to sort of capture a consumer market. For instance, services like Uber or apps like Instagram instantly get a bunch of people to start using them. For instance, for Uber, I feel like people don't realize how big of a thing it was to not have to rely on like a cab service anymore, to be able to just use an app to say, pick me up right here at this time. It was really fascinating for the time. And it makes sense why, because of platforms like Uber, taxi services instantly started having a hard time. Yet the thing is, once they started to thoroughly replace taxis, once your average person was much more comfortable using Uber than doing anything else, suddenly they can start taking advantage of us. They started to increase prices. They started to further invigorate systems where drivers were more like independent contractors. After all, Uber is a corporation where they technically don't even really have to own any cars. The drivers themselves, they have all the insurance. They're paying for all the repairs. It's a system in which they can continually oppress the people, both the workers and the users using this app. But eventually, people reach their limit, and in the real world, we can see that happening constantly. Now, I mention this because Nintendo has had a collapse before. The Wii U failed extraordinarily because after pumping out the Wii, Nintendo basically felt like they could do no wrong. So, going into the Wii U, the console was more expensive, it had more unique features and more expensive games that people, in reality, actually weren't all that excited about. And something oddly similar to the Switch and the Wii is that people don't want this sequel because they already have a pretty good working original. So according to Unjustified, during the Wii U era, Nintendo basically just ate themselves out from the inside. And the next thing you know, games like Donkey Kong Tropical Freeze, which initially released for $50, is now at a discounted Nintendo Selects price of $20. And then something big happened. The Nintendo Switch.
What the fuck is that? What the fuck is that? What the fuck? Oh shit! What? Whoa! Whoa! No! What?
The Nintendo Switch was really great for Nintendo. Everybody wanted this console, everybody was getting one. It was the big thing on the block. I mean, it's really hard to get that level of hype into words, but the Nintendo Switch was massive at launch. Everybody wanted one. And so guess what happens? Donkey Kong Tropical Freeze, from that discounted $20 price, up to $60. That is a prime example of what we're sort of letting happen. And more importantly, haven't you noticed that there wasn't any Nintendo Select line for the Nintendo Switch? There was nothing. And partially it's because they were using cartridges, so it's harder for them to mass print things. But at the same time, it's because they knew they didn't have to put their games on discount for people to buy them. So now they can sell the same game over a decade later for $60, because people are gonna buy it. There were signs on the wall, Tears of the Kingdom for $70, re-released games for $60, we let it all slide. We bought the console, we bought the games. We gave into Unjustified, just like we all gave into Uber because it was more convenient. But now, because of that, just like how prices for other services are continually rising because we give into it, the same thing is happening for the Nintendo Switch. And this is why the whole boycott Nintendo premise is kind of weird, because this isn't just a games industry thing. This is a much wider thing of we've just been giving into these companies. We're letting them extort money out of us. I think that's the exact reason why the console feels a little overpriced, the games feel overpriced, the services feel a little overpriced. It's not one individual thing about the Nintendo Switch 2 that's getting a massive boost. It's everything. If you ask me whether or not I'm getting the Nintendo Switch 2, I guess I'd have to say maybe, I guess. Like, generally speaking, I'm excited about the console. Donkey Kong Bonanza is looking to be one of the best 3D platformers released in the past few years. I'm not that excited for Mario Kart World, but I understand why it's a game that I'd be excited to try out a bit. The Nintendo Switch 2 itself, the console, that I'm not as excited for, and for that reason, I think I'm gonna give it some time. Maybe I'll wait for a special edition to come out. Maybe I'll wait for the new FromSoft title that I'm definitely gonna have to play. But at the same time, I think that me and many of you are left in this situation where we're just gonna rest a little on this one. And I don't think that boycotting Nintendo is the answer, I think that we're all gonna eventually get a Switch 2, even those that want to boycott Nintendo. But the truth is, I think it's fine to wait out on this one. I don't think that we want another Wii U to happen, but I think at the same time, all of us feel generally less enthused about this experience. I'm excited for the Switch 2, but I mean, drop the fucking price. Ring, ring, ring. Ring, ring, ring. Telephone. Fuck, I'm late for Zoom. Oh.